Thanks for clicking on this video. I really appreciate you being here. If you enjoy the story, consider subscribing and feel free to like the video or drop a comment below. It really helps the algorithm recommend these videos to you and to others who might enjoy them too. Either way, thanks for giving it a chance, and I hope it pulls you in. I have been a ham radio operator for 20 years. In that time, I have talked to people on every continent, heard voices from the other side of the world crackling through my speakers, made friends I have never met in person. The radio has always been my connection to something larger than myself, a way of reaching out into the darkness and finding other souls reaching back. But I never expected to hear the voices that came through last March. I never expected to learn what has been protecting us all this time, and I never expected to be one of the few people left to remember them. My name is Emmett Shaw. I live alone in a rural house outside the small town of Caldwell, population around 800, or it was 800 before the blackout. Now it is closer to 30 and shrinking every week. Let me tell you how we got here. Let me tell you about the voices on the radio and what they tried to do for us, and why I broadcast their warning every day even though they are gone and can never hear me say thank you. It was a Wednesday night in late March, around 10:30. I was in my radio room, a converted spare bedroom filled with equipment I have collected over the years. Transceivers, antennas, amplifiers, all the tools of my hobby arranged on shelves and desks that left barely enough room to sit. The night was quiet, clear skies, good conditions for long-distance communication. I was scanning through frequencies, listening to the chatter of other operators, the fragments of conversations from around the world. Then I hit a frequency that should have been empty. It was a band reserved for emergency use, one that licensed operators know to leave clear unless there is a genuine crisis. But something was transmitting on it, a voice unlike anything I had ever heard. It was layered, as if multiple people were speaking the same words at slightly different times, their voices overlapping and harmonizing in a way that made my skin crawl. Please, can anyone hear us? We need help. A worldwide blackout is coming. Please help us. The transmission repeated several times, then faded into static. I adjusted my equipment, tried to clean up the signal, tried to respond. This is Emmett Shaw, call sign W7ESH. I copy your transmission. Please identify yourself. What is your location? What is the nature of your emergency? No response, just the message repeating at intervals, that strange layered voice pleading for help. I assumed it was a hoax. Some bored operator playing games, maybe testing out some new voice modulation software. I logged the frequency and the time, made a mental note to check it again tomorrow. But something about the voice bothered me. The quality of it, the desperation in those layered tones. It did not sound like someone playing a prank. It sounded like something genuinely asking for help. Something that did not know how else to reach us. Before I went to bed, I checked the frequency one more time. The message had changed. We do not have much time. The blackout will come in 6 days. We cannot stop it. We can only warn you. Please help us warn others. Please help us prepare. We have protected you for so long. We cannot protect you anymore. I sat in my radio room, suddenly cold, suddenly unsure of what I was hearing. Protected us from what? Over the next 2 days, I monitored that frequency obsessively. I neglected my work, forgot to eat, spent every waking hour listening to the transmissions that continued to come through, growing more detailed, more desperate with each passing hour. The voices explained what they were, as best they could explain something so far outside human experience. They were entities that existed within the electromagnetic spectrum, within the hum of electricity that surrounded modern civilization. They had been there since humanity first harnessed electrical power, drawn to it, sustained by it, coming into existence in the fields generated by power lines and transformers and the countless devices that filled the modern world. They did not know if they had existed before electricity, waiting in some dormant state for humans to generate the fields that would give them form. Or perhaps they had been created by humanity's technology, born from the electromagnetic soup that surrounded every city, every town, every home with a working outlet. They did not fully understand their own nature, only that they existed and that they were aware, and that they had come to care about the small, fragile creatures who had unknowingly given them life. And they had been protecting us. There were other things, they said, older things that existed before electricity, things that had hunted humanity since before we discovered fire, since before we learned to speak, since before we climbed down from the trees and began our long, slow journey towards civilization. These things lived in darkness and silence. They fed on the living. They had been the reason our ancestors feared the night, the reason every culture has stories of monsters in the dark, the reason children instinctively pull blankets over their heads when the lights go out. When humanity built power grids, when electromagnetic interference spread across the globe like a humming web of protection, these older things were pushed back, driven into the margins, forced into the deep places where electricity did not reach, the caves and chasms and forgotten corners of the world where the hum of the grid could not penetrate. The entities in the electricity became a barrier, a defense. They did not fully understand why or how, only that their existence somehow kept the older things at bay. The electromagnetic fields disrupted whatever senses the older things used to hunt. The constant buzz of civilization created interference they could not navigate. For over a century, the entities had served this purpose, protecting a humanity that did not know they existed, that could not perceive them, that lived in blissful ignorance of the darkness, waiting just beyond the hum of the power grid. But something had changed. Something had been changing for years, they said. A slow weakening that had accelerated beyond their ability to compensate. The grid was failing, not from lack of maintenance or natural disasters, but from something deeper, something fundamental. The older things had been pushing back, testing the barriers, finding ways through. Small incursions at first, isolated incidents that were covered up or dismissed, then larger breaches, more frequent, harder to contain. Now the breaking point had come. The grid would fail completely, everywhere at once, and there was nothing anyone could do to prevent it. In 6 days, the power would fail everywhere, all at once, and when it did, the entities would cease to exist, and the older things would return. I tried to tell people about the transmissions. I contacted other ham radio operators I had known for years, posted on forums where I had been a trusted member, tried to get the word out however I could. Most people dismissed me as a conspiracy theorist, a nutcase who had spent too much time alone with his radio equipment. Some laughed, some expressed concern for my mental health. A few simply blocked me and refused to engage, but a handful listened. An operator in Canada named Jean-Pierre said he had heard similar transmissions, faint and broken, pleading for help in French and English simultaneously. A woman in Australia named Margaret reported the same thing, voices on frequencies that should have been empty, begging someone to listen. An old friend in Japan sent me a message saying he had picked up the transmissions too, that operators across Asia were reporting the same phenomenon. The entities were broadcasting everywhere to anyone who would listen. They were using the last of their strength to warn a world that did not believe they existed. They had a request, a way I might help even though I could not save them. They could not prevent the blackout, could not preserve themselves, could not stop what was coming. But they could share information. They could tell humanity how to survive what was approaching. The older things were drawn to sound and light, they explained. They hunted by vibration, by noise, by any disruption of the silence they preferred. When the power died, humanity would need to go dark, go silent, hide in the stillness, and hope the hunters passed them by. They told me the rules, simple and terrible. Do not make light. Do not make sound. Do not move unless you must. Wait for daylight, when the older things would retreat to the shadows. And they asked me to spread the word, to warn as many people as possible, to give humanity a chance, even a small one, of surviving what was coming. With 4 days left before the blackout, I began preparing my home. I drove to every store within 50 miles and bought supplies, canned food that did not need cooking, bottled water, blankets for warmth without heating. I covered my windows with blackout curtains, removed anything that might make noise, padded the floors with rugs to muffle footsteps. My neighbors watched me with concern, probably thinking I had finally lost my mind. I tried to warn them, tried to explain what was coming, but they looked at me with pity and politely suggested I might want to talk to someone professional. I gave up trying to convince them. I had done what I could. The entities continued to broadcast, their voices growing weaker, more fragmented with each passing day. They were fading, dying, using the last of whatever they were to send out warnings that most of the world would ignore. I drove into Caldwell and tried to warn people in person. Most dismissed me, some laughed. A few looked at me with the kind of concern reserved for the mentally ill. But Ruth Emerson listened. Ruth was an elderly woman who ran the general store in Caldwell, a fixture of the community who had lived there her entire life. When I told her about the transmissions, about the entities and the blackout and the things that would come when the lights went out, she did not laugh. She did not dismiss me. She just nodded slowly, her weathered face thoughtful. My grandmother used to tell stories, she said, about the dark times, the years before electricity reached these parts. She said there were things out there that people do not talk about anymore, things that went away when the lights came. She looked at me with eyes that had seen 8 decades of life. I do not know if I believe your radio voices, but I am old enough to know that the world holds more than we understand, and I am too old to take chances." Ruth prepared. A few others who heard about her preparations did the same. Most of the town thought we were all crazy, bonding over a shared delusion. 2 days before the blackout, I received a final transmission. The voices were barely audible now, fading like a radio station slipping out of range. I had to press my ear against the speaker to make out the words, and even then I caught only fragments. "We are sorry we could not do more. We tried to protect you. We tried to keep them away. Remember what we told you. Stay silent. Stay dark. Do not let them find you." A pause, filled with static that sounded almost like breathing. "And please, if you survive, remember that we existed. Remember that we tried." The frequency went silent. I sat alone in my radio room and cried for entities I had never known existed until a week ago. They had protected humanity for over a century, had given everything they had to warn us, and now they were dying in the electromagnetic spaces where no one could see them. I hoped they knew someone was listening. I hoped they knew they had made a difference. The last 2 days were the longest of my life. I monitored every frequency, searching for more transmissions, finding only fragments and echoes. Other operators reported the same thing. The voices were fading everywhere, growing weaker, preparing for the end. Then, at exactly 8:17 on a Tuesday evening, the power went out. I felt it happen. Not just the absence of electricity, but the absence of something more. Something I had never consciously perceived, but had always been there. The hum of civilization, the buzz of the grid, the presence of the entities who lived within it. All of it vanished in an instant, leaving a silence more profound than anything I had ever experienced. The darkness was absolute. No streetlights outside my window, no glow from distant towns, no light pollution painting the sky orange. Just blackness, pure and complete. The kind of darkness humanity had not experienced since before we learned to harness fire. I sat in my darkened radio room, surrounded by equipment that would never work again, and I knew the entities were gone. I could feel their absence like a hole in the world, like something vital had been removed from reality itself. For over a century, they had been there, humming in the wires, buzzing in the transformers, existing in the fields that surrounded every human settlement. Now they were simply gone, dissolved into nothing. Their last act, a warning that most of the world had ignored. I waited in the darkness, listening to the silence, knowing what was coming next. I moved through my house in complete darkness, not daring to light a candle, not daring to make a sound. I knew every inch of my home by memory, had lived here for 15 years, and I navigated by touch and instinct. I found my way to a window and pulled back the blackout curtain just enough to see outside. The stars were brighter than I had ever seen them, with no light pollution to dim their glow. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light, beautiful and terrifying in its clarity. The night was clear and cold, the kind of night that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. Then I saw something move in my yard. It was not walking. It was not crawling. It was flowing, shifting, a darkness that moved through darkness. a shadow that existed independent of any light to cast it. It had no shape I could describe, no form that made sense to my eyes. It was simply wrongness given motion, absence given presence, the kind of thing that should not exist, but clearly did. It paused near my porch, near the place where my porch light used to shine, as if confused by the absence of something it expected to find. More shapes appeared, emerging from the tree line, rising from the fields, converging on my property like they had always been there, just waiting for the lights to go out. They moved through my yard, investigated my house, pressed against my windows. I stood perfectly still, not breathing, not moving, watching them through the glass. They could not see me. They were looking for sound, for movement, for any sign of prey, and I gave them nothing. After what felt like hours, they moved on, flowing down the road toward town, toward the 800 people who had not listened, who had not prepared, who did not know to stay silent. I heard sounds from the direction of Caldwell. A dog barking, cut off suddenly. A car alarm wailing, then stopping. Screams that rose and fell and then went silent. I sat in my dark house and listened to my neighbors die, one by one, and I could do nothing but wait for morning. Dawn came eventually, grey light seeping over the horizon, pushing back the darkness. The shapes retreated, pulling back into the shadows, into the places where light did not reach. I waited until full daylight before I moved. My neighborhood was empty. Houses stood silent, doors hanging open, windows shattered. I found drag marks in the dirt of my driveway, leading toward the road, disappearing into nothing. I did not find bodies. I tried not to think about what that meant. I drove my old truck into Caldwell. It was a diesel engine that did not need electricity to run, just fuel and a working battery, and I had kept it maintained for years out of habit. Now that habit had become survival. The drive into town took only 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. The road was littered with abandoned vehicles, cars that had died when the power went out, their drivers either taken or fled into the darkness. I had to weave between them, sometimes driving on the shoulder, sometimes cutting across fields. The town was devastated. Buildings were damaged, windows shattered, doors torn from hinges. Cars were overturned in the streets, some of them crushed as if something massive had rolled over them. The streets were littered with debris and destruction. Personal belongings scattered across sidewalks, evidence of panicked flight that had ended in silence. The general store where Ruth worked had its front window smashed in. The hardware store next door was missing its entire front wall. The church steeple had been knocked askew, leaning at an angle that defied gravity. Whatever had come through here had not just hunted, it had raged. But there were survivors. They emerged from basements and closets, from sealed rooms and hidden spaces. People who had listened to my warnings. People who had heard about Ruth's preparations and decided to take precautions just in case. People who had stayed silent through the longest night of their lives, listening to their neighbors die, unable to help, unable to do anything but wait for dawn. I recognized some of them. The Miller family from the farm on the edge of town, all 4 of them alive, holding hands like they would never let go. Old Tom Garrett, who ran the auto shop, his face grey with shock, but his eyes still sharp. a young mother named Beth holding a sleeping infant who had somehow stayed quiet through the entire night, a miracle that had saved both their lives. Ruth Emerson was among them, pale and shaken but alive. She emerged from the cellar beneath her store, blinking in the morning light like someone waking from a nightmare. When she saw me, she walked over slowly, her joints stiff from hours of crouching in the darkness. She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "Your radio friends were right," she said. "My grandmother was right. They came back." There were maybe 30 survivors in Caldwell out of 800 residents. 30 people who had believed the warnings, who had prepared, who had made it through the first night. We gathered in the daylight, speaking in whispers even though the sun was up. We shared what we had seen, what we had heard, what we had learned. The rules were simple, just as the entities had told me. Stay silent, stay dark, wait for daylight. Do not let them find you. We had until nightfall to figure out how to survive another night. We fortified the old stone church, the sturdiest building in town. Its walls were 2 feet thick, built by settlers 150 years ago who knew how to construct things that would last. The windows were narrow, easier to seal than the large plate glass of modern buildings. The basement was deep and solid, carved into the bedrock beneath the town. We gathered supplies from the abandoned stores, taking only what we needed, moving in teams so no one was ever alone. We sealed the windows with boards and blankets, creating layers of darkness that would hide any accidental light. We covered the floors with rugs and mattresses, muffling our footsteps. We established hand signals for basic communication, developed a system of written notes for anything more complex. We worked in near silence, communicating in gestures and whispers, flinching at every loud sound. A dropped hammer made us all freeze, hearts pounding, eyes scanning the sky for any sign that something had heard. A sneeze sent ripples of fear through the group. Every noise was a potential death sentence, and we were all learning just how loud normal human existence really was. The sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that seemed almost mocking in their beauty. We huddled in the darkness of the church, 30 survivors pressed together in the main hall, listening to the shapes return. We could hear them outside, that flowing sound that was not quite wind, not quite voices. They moved through the town, searching, hunting, looking for anyone who had survived the first night. They pressed against the church walls, tested the sealed windows, circled the building like predators investigating a potential meal. We did not make a sound. We survived. Days became weeks. We lost people along the way. Tom Garrett was taken on the 8th night. He had developed a cough, some kind of respiratory infection that he could not shake. He tried to muffle it, pressed cloths against his mouth, buried his face in pillows. But one night, in the deepest hours of darkness, a coughing fit took him that he could not control. We heard the shapes converge on the building, heard them find the crack in the window where sound was escaping. Tom ran for the basement, hoping to buy us time, hoping the shapes would follow him and leave the rest of us alone. They did follow him. We never saw him again. Beth's infant started crying on the 12th night, hungry and unable to understand why her mother would not feed her in the darkness. Beth smothered the sound as best she could, wrapped the baby in blankets, tried to nurse her into silence. but the shapes heard. Beth took her daughter and ran into the night, leading the hunters away from the church, sacrificing herself so the rest of us might live. We found her shawl the next morning, caught on a fence post half a mile from town. Nothing else. A young man named Jerome was taken when he knocked over a stack of cans while searching for food in an abandoned house. An elderly woman named Patricia simply disappeared one night, walked out of the church for reasons we never understood, and never came back. One by one, the shapes took them, and our group grew smaller. 30 became 25, 25 became 20. The mathematics of survival were brutal and unforgiving. But we adapted. We learned to live in silence, to communicate without words, to fear the night and worship the day. We learned which sounds were quiet enough to risk, which movements were safe, which hours were most dangerous. I returned to my radio room during daylight hours, trying to reach other survivors. Without power, most of my equipment was useless, but I had an old crystal radio that needed no electricity, a relic from an earlier era that I had kept out of nostalgia. I picked up fragments of transmissions, survivors around the world sharing what they knew. The blackout was global, just as the entities had warned. The shapes were everywhere, hunting on every continent, in every country. Humanity had been reduced to scattered groups, hiding in silence, trying to survive until dawn. I thought about the entities often. I wondered what they truly were, where they had come from, how they had come to exist in the electricity that powered human civilization. Had they always been there, waiting for us to generate the fields that would give them form? Or had we somehow created them, brought them into being through our technology, given birth to protectors we never knew we had? I wondered if they knew from the beginning that this day would come. If they spent a century protecting us, knowing that eventually they would fail, that eventually the older things would find a way through. I hope they knew they had made a difference. I hope they knew that some of us listened. Spring turned to summer, and we learned to read the patterns of the shapes. They were more active on cloudy nights, when even moonlight was dimmed and the darkness was absolute. They were less active near dawn and dusk, as if the transition between light and dark confused them, made them uncertain. They seemed to avoid certain places for reasons we could not determine, certain houses they would not enter, certain corners of town they skirted around. We developed theories about why some places were safer. Maybe the entities had left traces of themselves behind, electromagnetic remnants that lingered even without power. Maybe the older things avoided places where their ancient enemies had been strongest. We did not know, and we could not test our theories without risking lives. We learned to grow food in silence. We tilled soil with padded tools, planted seeds with gentle hands, harvested vegetables without making a sound. We learned to purify water by filtering it through sand and charcoal rather than boiling it, because boiling meant fire, and fire meant crackling sounds that could be heard from far away. We learned to communicate in ways we never imagined. Sign language became our primary tongue, a mix of official signs and improvised gestures that let us convey complex ideas without making a sound. We wrote notes for anything detailed, passing papers back and forth like students in a classroom. We learned to read expressions, to understand the subtle shifts of face and posture that revealed what words could not safely say. It was a hard existence, a frightening existence, but it was existence, and existence was worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth all the silence and fear and careful movements that kept us alive. 1 year after the blackout, I stood in my radio room with a hand-cranked generator I had built from salvaged parts. It made noise when I turned it, a soft whirring that I only risked during the brightest hours of the day, when the shapes were deepest in their hiding places. I broadcast every day, the same message, hoping someone new would hear it. This is Emmett Shaw in Caldwell. If you can hear this, you are not alone. Stay silent, stay dark, wait for daylight. We are still here. We are still surviving. I thought about the entities who first spoke to me, who asked for help, who begged humanity to listen. They wanted us to spread the word, to warn others, to give people a chance to survive. I was doing what they asked. I could not bring them back, could not restore the power grid, could not defeat the shapes that hunted us every night. But I could remember. I could honor their sacrifice by surviving, by helping others survive, by making sure their warning was not in vain. I finished my broadcast and turned off the generator, letting the silence settle back over my radio room. My equipment was mostly dead weight now, relics of a world that no longer existed. But I kept it all, maintained it, treated it with respect. Somewhere in those circuits and wires, entities had once lived. Beings I never knew existed, who protected me and everyone else for my entire life. They were gone now, faded into nothing when the power died, but their memory remained. I walked to my window and looked out at the setting sun. Another night was coming, another night of silence and fear, another night of hiding from things that should not exist. But I was alive. Ruth was alive. 23 others were still alive in Caldwell, learning to survive in a world transformed. The entities asked for help, and we were still here to give it, still surviving, still spreading the word, still remembering. The darkness came, flowing across the fields, pooling in the shadows, bringing the shapes that would hunt until dawn. I sat in silence and watched them pass, watched them search for prey they would not find, watched them flow through a world that had once been bright with electricity and loud with human activity. I whispered a thank you into the darkness. The entities could not hear me. They were gone, dissolved into nothing when the power failed, their existence erased along with everything else that depended on the grid. But I said it anyway, because someone should remember them. Someone should know that before the blackout, before the shapes returned, before the world went dark and silent, something existed in the electricity that surrounded us. Something that did not have to protect us, that could have simply existed without caring what happened to the creatures who generated the fields that gave it life. But it did care. It cared enough to warn us. It cared enough to teach us how to survive. It cared enough to spend its dying moments broadcasting to anyone who would listen. Something in the electricity loved humanity, and I will remember that love for as long as I survive. The night passes. dawn comes. Another day of silent survival begins. And somewhere, on a frequency that will never carry voices again, I hope the entities know they were not forgotten. I hope they know we are still here. I hope they know their sacrifice meant something. Because it did. It does. It always will. As long as anyone remembers. As long as anyone survives to tell the story. As long as anyone listens.